In the late 1940s, officials within the Central Intelligence Agency were driven by a sense of urgency when considering the possibility that the Soviet bloc had already made significant strides in developing so-called truth drugs and in creating interrogation techniques capable of making anyone talk. They heard rumors, received fragmented reports, observed the situation from afar, and feared falling behind in what could become a new clandestine battlefield, far from the traditional front. The risks of infiltration, the rivalry with major powers, and the fear that a potential enemy might develop more advanced methods ahead of time prompted the CIA to imagine defensive solutions, but also to open the door to more offensive tactics. In this mindset, security officials, eager to protect their agents and explore all avenues, evaluated whether it was possible to place an individual in such a psychological or physiological vulnerability that they might reveal, consciously or not, critical information. They operated amid a paranoid atmosphere, where every piece of information suggested that the other side might already possess methods capable of breaking any mental resistance. The newly created agency in 1947 was still defining its scope and means of investigation. As the Cold War hardened, its leaders perceived the need to understand how to support their agents against potential interrogation, while considering the possibility of turning these techniques against targets deemed hostile. Experimentation, long fragmented, gradually concentrated into more structured projects, managed by departments with the tacit approval of the highest levels of the organization. By 1949, within the Office of Security, a small team began early attempts to analyze the effect of certain drugs on will and memory, while considering the option of hypnosis. This team met in official premises and worked under maximum cover, fearing that the revelation of these researches would cause a scandal or give the Soviet Union an advantage. The officials believed that a few specific chemicals, administered in small doses or under certain conditions, might prevent a subject from lying or resisting questions. According to nsarchive2.gwu.edu, this experimentation program was given a codename from the start, BLUEBIRD. Documents from the era, often classified, indicated that the CIA was not only seeking to test substances known for their psychoactive properties, but also to develop favorable conditions for obtaining the involuntary cooperation of a target. Early memos mentioned substances that could alter the perception of time, disrupt judgment, or enhance suggestibility. Officials were also interested in the prospect of destroying, in a trained individual, the classic methods of information protection. In this spirit, they wondered if it was possible to plunge a person into a second state, exploit memory flaws, or manipulate them to the point of making them forget their actions. Few details of these studies circulated outside the very restricted circle of the BLUEBIRD cell, but those involved seemed driven by the conviction that the future of intelligence would entail domination over the human mind. At this stage, no one spoke openly of large-scale manipulations, but the ambition to hold a mind, influence behavior, and make interrogation more productive was already present. In 1950, BLUEBIRD received official approval that extended the scope of the work. According to a document available on intelligence.senate.gov, the objectives clearly stated by the CIA included protecting the agency's personnel from the enemy's forced extraction of information, which already implied counter-interrogation procedures and techniques to help resist pressures. But other areas emerged. The possibility of controlling an individual through methods described as special, optimizing memory to force the recall of desired elements, or ensuring defense against potential hostile control from adversarial powers. All these concerns were reflected in the flurry of research, conducted in parallel by a few internal scientists and sometimes by external consultants, tasked with testing certain drugs in a confidential laboratory. Internal communications highlight that the Soviet threat is considered urgent. There are fears of sleeper agents, defectors who could be reconditioned, or American spies captured and turned. In fact, the CIA hierarchy is sensitive to all requests that allow the development of new methods to secure employees, while evaluating the potential for more intrusive use on enemy subjects. Initial notes mention experiments on volunteers, sometimes with little medical supervision, or at least limited supervision. Leaders believe speed is essential, as each passing month could provide the adversary with an advantage. In this atmosphere, anything seems possible, as long as it can be justified as being in the national interest. Ethical precautions remain relatively thin, with the idea that the end justifies the means if it saves American lives or provides a strategic advantage. After several months of trial and error, the BLUEBIRD team begins to establish a form of methodology, which practically means combinations of drugs, conditioning, and sometimes hypnosis. Internal reports note that some sessions are conducted with a subject placed in a secure environment, under observation. Staff are searching for the right chemical dose and the right verbal approach. The agency is trying to understand how far it is possible to push a person's suggestibility. For example, could a normally balanced individual, under the influence of a combination of barbiturates, light hypnosis, and psychological pressure, quickly reveal information that would be difficult to disclose under normal circumstances? Some participants also explore the idea of implanting an artificial memory or erasing the memory of a particular session. Nothing proves at this point that they are achieving conclusive results, but the idea of having a dedicated, funded program to explore these pathways represents a significant leap forward for the young CIA. The political actors in place do not oppose these directions much, considering the Cold War as an imperative for national security. The few skeptics who question the actual effectiveness of these truth drugs face general enthusiasm, given the obsession with anticipating Soviet advances. Fears of espionage, mole cases, and rising tensions in Korea fuel this desire to try everything to secure the American position. Under pressure, the agency continues to bolster BLUEBIRD and release funds to intensify efforts. In August 1951, a name change occurs. BLUEBIRD becomes ARTICHOKE. According to intelligencesenate.gov, this renaming is not merely cosmetic. It marks an explicit intention to further structure the program and make it more flexible. Henceforth, ARTICHOKE includes not only internal experiments, partly conducted at the agency's facilities, but also interrogations conducted abroad as part of operations that remained classified for a long time. Some officers explain that the evolution of the name reflects an expansion of the project's ambitions. As the team grows, new experts in chemistry, psychology, and psychiatry are introduced, capable of bringing fresh ideas on mental manipulation and resistance to interrogation. The evolution from BLUEBIRD to ARTICHOKE involves more resources, more study subjects, and more application possibilities. Internal documents indicate that the agency begins to consider concrete scenarios where a detained individual, in controlled conditions, could be subjected to various interrogation methods, ranging from chemical products to deep hypnosis. At this stage, even though everything takes place under strict secrecy, some officers in the field or within American embassies abroad hear rumors about the existence of this extraordinary project. Security section officials remain discreet, but do not hesitate to send teams where the situation demands, hoping to test the effectiveness of techniques on people deemed hostile or potentially hostile. This evolution is reflected in a noticeable increase in the number of experiments and the establishment of procedures intended to gather as much information as possible about the psychological state of subjects before, during, and after the sessions. Officials seek to measure the reliability of the testimonies obtained, the pertinence of the drugs, and the reproducibility of the results. They simultaneously take precautions to ensure that the broad outlines of these operations do not leak by limiting the distribution of reports and spreading documents in separate locations. The archives show that with ARTICHOKE, the CIA is no longer confined to laboratory tests or exercises with formally recruited volunteers. Some selection criteria are established to find individuals deemed more representative of a potential target. For example, people with international contacts, profiles allegedly difficult to break during interrogation, or subjects likely to hold crucial information for national security. The agency then intends to discover how to break through the psychological defenses of these individuals. Even though the publicly accessible documents remain sparse, they suggest that the notion of consent or prior information to the subject is not always respected. The officials prefer to take formal precautions to protect the confidentiality of the operation, rather than scrutinize ethical considerations. According to nsarchive2.gwu.edu, senior CIA figures are convinced that the Soviets, or perhaps the Chinese, have already deployed similar techniques to strengthen their espionage. The bureaucratic machinery having its own logic, an increase in paperwork accompanies each step: mission reports, classified memos, instructions sent to agents operating outside the United States. In these documents, the same obsession is found: maintaining the lead over any form of mental engineering that the adversary might develop. Observing the development of the project, it is noted that from the formalization of BLUEBIRD in 1950 and until the name change in 1951, the CIA sets up a real coordination structure. Section chiefs create internal communication channels to record experiment reports, share highlight lists, and disseminate directives on research priorities. The project's activities benefit from a budgetary support that, even modest, has nothing to do with that of other classic scientific programs. Great secrecy is required, justifying all sorts of underground expenses, often justified by cryptic budget lines. The hierarchy makes security an object of obsession, fearing that the existence of this project might be publicly revealed. The locations where the tests are held are diverse and sometimes very discreet, ranging from remote military installations to anonymous sites in urban areas. The internal volunteers, especially at the beginning, do not necessarily suspect the scale of the project, as they are often told about studies on fatigue or stress resistance. The officials assure they are fulfilling their role as protectors of the nation, convinced that these processes, if successful, will make the difference in critical interrogations. In the summer of 1951, at the very moment when the new name ARTICHOKE is validated, some documents indicate that the CIA is already considering expanding the scope of the experiments. It is envisaged to send dedicated officers to allied countries or to certain American bases abroad to conduct tests on suspicious individuals. The argument advanced is that the effectiveness of these methods must be evaluated under conditions close to a real operational environment. The CIA's legal advisors hardly intervene to temper these ambitions, as the priority is the ideological struggle between the East and West blocs. The elements preserved in the archives of nsarchive2.gwu.edu show sometimes vague, even coded notes describing internal discussions on how to conduct these experiments outside American territory. The formulations often use initials, file numbers, and expressions such as special interrogation opportunity, instead of speaking explicitly about drugs or hypnosis. The individuals orchestrating the program deem it crucial to compartmentalize information so that each participant only has access to the part they need to know. In this game, the new name Artichoke also serves to compartmentalize the operations. It is an innocuous enough designation to avoid arousing too much curiosity, whereas BLUEBIRD, already used for some time, risks becoming too well known in certain closed circles. The rise of special interrogations begins to take shape as early as 1951, when teams within the agency identify several potentially useful techniques for obtaining sensitive information. The term covers a range of methods that gradually emerge in documents from the era. First, there is the use of drugs and chemicals, which may make an individual more vulnerable during an interrogation, or, according to some hypotheses, promote a kind of partial amnesia after the interview. Archive reports also mention the possibility of altering perceptions and behavior by acting directly on the nervous system, which prompts internal agency researchers to explore experimental substances to measure their effects on the psyche. As notes and memos progress, it appears this approach is accompanied by tests on different molecules, as if the potential of each substance had to be evaluated independently before considering a more systematic operational use. The second important method is the practice of hypnosis, regarded as a psychological tool capable of bypassing certain mental defenses. The files explain that agents are interested in the possibility of bringing a target into a maximum suggestibility state, then extracting buried knowledge from them, or, conversely, implanting reflexes or conditioned responses. Finally, There is a more subtle form of psychological constraint, total isolation, also referred to as total isolation, which relies on the deprivation of all social contact, temporal markers, and sensory stimuli to weaken the target's mind. This prolonged isolation, considered for experimental purposes, is presented in the documents as a psychological harassment tool, probably intended to deplete an individual's mental resources to better force them to cooperate. At this stage, these methods are still described rather theoretically, even though preliminary experiments are already underway in the competent offices. In 1952, a turning point occurs in the internal organization chart. Until then, the Office of Scientific Intelligence, generally identified under the acronym OSI, plays a central role in monitoring these research efforts and developing experimental protocols. The OSI is defined as a service oriented towards scientific, theoretical, and documentary analysis, whose teams address these subjects primarily from the angle of feasibility and pure knowledge. However, from this year 1952 onwards, the overall responsibility for what are now termed special interrogation methods is transferred to the Inspection and Security Office, or INSO. This office, a predecessor of the current Office of Security, is more dedicated to the internal protection of the agency and the security of its operations. In memos from that era, it is noted that the INSO is tasked with coordinating efforts, establishing clear guidelines, and using medical and technical staff as needed. This wording, recurring in the documentation, means that doctors, psychiatrists, and technicians are mobilized when the situation requires it, but ultimately, planning and execution belong to the security sphere. This shift from an essentially analytical department to a division focused on security and operational effectiveness reflects a desire to realize the studies conducted so far. The idea is no longer just to see if a given chemical has an impact on memory, but to determine how to exploit it for an interrogation, how to limit the risks for the agency, and how to employ these techniques in a real context. The cited documents specify that this reorganization creates a more conducive framework for the defensive and offensive dimension of special interrogation techniques. Thwarting foreign attempts to extract information from a captured agent is a priority, but officials are not hesitant to also consider active use of these methods towards individuals deemed sensitive or potentially hostile. The transition to a more accomplished operational mode is seen in the abundance of reports describing experimental sessions, including in the field of hypnosis. The archives indicate that between 1951 and 1953, a large number of tests take place in agency premises, and that a certain number of these experiments are conducted on volunteer employees. The sources mention several hundred sessions, a high volume which shows a notable enthusiasm for this technique. In the minds of those who wield it, hypnosis is not limited to a trance state where the individual would simply lose consciousness. It opens the way to attempts to program a person, make them behave in a specific way, or create in them a form of artificial memory. The documents even speak of narco-hypnosis, when hypnosis is combined with the simultaneous administration of certain substances, potentially increasing the subject's suggestibility. Employees participating in the tests are supposed to have given their consent, but there are few details on how they are informed about the actual risks and stakes of these experiments. During this period, the agency is seeking to detail each parameter: the duration of the trance, the ease of transitioning from a conscious state to a hypnotic state, or the resistance presented by different individuals. The stated objective is to have a reliable, documented tool that could be used both to extract information deemed vital and to protect secrets by erasing the memory of certain activities in an agent's mind. Simultaneously, the idea of amplifying psychological pressure through total isolation is beginning to take shape. A memo from March 21, 1955, presents total isolation as a potential means of pushing an individual to the breaking point without resorting to direct physical violence. Proponents of this method argue that a subject kept in a room devoid of natural light, deprived of human contact, and without any interaction can quickly become trapped in a psychological distress conducive to manipulation. Archives from March 16, 1955, mention a series of experiments conducted on 6 military volunteers, during which marked signs of anxiety, disorientation, and, in some cases, degradation of lucidity are observed. No available document proves that this
Total isolation has been deployed in an actual operation abroad,
but the mere fact that memos address this method in detail suggests a real interest in its use in the field. The difficulty of managing long-term medical and psychological consequences is often discussed. Lacking certainties, the records do not indicate that the technique was practiced on a large scale, but they testify to a curiosity from security services about the effectiveness of such extreme conditions in breaking down resistances during an interrogation. Multiple flashes of operations appear in the now accessible files, though many of these documents are partially censored. In 1954, there is a trace of an ARTICHOKE team conducting interrogations under the influence of unspecified substances. A memo dated January 13, 1955, describes the use of solution number 1 and solution number 2, without further detail. The note mentions a straight drug technique, meaning a method that does not combine drugs with hypnosis or other suggestive processes. This brief mention is part of a series of operations described sporadically, suggesting that several interventions take place, often without detail on the outcome or the state of the interrogated subjects. Along the same lines, a document dated January 20, 1959, states an explicit request to implement a P1 interrogation, an expression that seems here to refer to the use of LSD. The approval is signed on January 27, 1959, but the file contains no information on the implementation or the final result of this interrogation. Previously, in June 1952, another ARTICHOKE team is dispatched to conduct interrogations, but again, the available memo does not outline the methods used or the outcome of the interviews. This lack of detail may result from a desire to maintain secrecy in official reports, or perhaps from a lack of detailed follow-up within the preserved archives. Nevertheless, these snippets confirm the existence of actual operations, employing techniques that go beyond mere laboratory tests. The coherence of these special interrogations largely rests on the existence of an internal network of actors who meet regularly to share information and plan the next steps. According to the documents, representatives of the involved units meet almost monthly. They discuss scientific progress, compare reports of experiments conducted in the United States, and decide on the opportunity to apply these techniques abroad based on current intelligence priorities. Each of these meetings is an occasion to validate new protocols, choose a promising substance to test in real conditions, or select the most competent people to be sent to the field. Reports indicate that this core group includes both security domain officials, medical experts, hypnosis specialists, and chemical engineers. They all collaborate to evaluate the effectiveness and risks associated with each approach. The memos do not always state who makes the final decision, but it is clear that INSO orchestrates these exchanges and delegates responsibilities. As the years go by, some participants acquire considerable expertise in the misuse of pharmacological substances or in the practice of hypnosis, so their opinions carry more weight in internal negotiations. Behind the scenes, this shift toward operational practice raises ethical and medical concerns. Reports do not indicate in-depth discussions on these aspects, but they hint at scattered reservations or questions, notably from some consulted physicians. Nevertheless, the overall dynamics favor the goal of national security and defense of higher interests, recurring expressions that seem to justify the pursuit and perfection of controversial techniques. The stubbornness to explore hypnosis in particular is perceived in the establishment, within several agency buildings, of workshops where they multiply. Attempts at trance induction, awakening, post-hypnotic suggestion, and sometimes attempt to implant orders to execute later. Meanwhile, there is systematic research into various chemical compounds. Teams change dosages, compare the effects of intravenous injection to oral administration, and test different cocktails. Some products receive more attention, like LSD, which begins to be subject to specific examinations. The cross-referencing of documents indicates, however, that the dispersion of these researches between several departments and parallel subprojects sometimes makes the centralization of results difficult. This period is marked by a flurry of more or less coordinated initiatives fueled by the constant fear of seeing the Soviet bloc or other powers develop similar or even more advanced methods. In November 1953, a remarkable event suddenly retains the attention of the officials who examine, more than 2 decades later, all documents related to the experiments conducted by the agency. At this precise moment, everything revolves around the use of LSD, a psychoactive substance discovered in 1938 by Swiss chemist Albert Hofmann, and which is the subject of growing interest for its effects on consciousness. In the papers studied in 1975, investigators discovered that in this month of November 1953, several people unknowingly received doses of LSD, which immediately causes a strong internal stir. The documents specifically mention Frank Olson, a civilian employed by the Department of the Army, who finds himself involved in these tests without knowing it. The most troubling information, which upsets today's observers, concerns the tragic fate of this man. In the days following the administration of the substance, he is entrusted to the care of a psychiatrist. Then he dies by falling out of a hotel room window in New York. The few official language elements describe the scene as an apparent suicide, but retrospective discussions wonder what is really happening at that moment. Olson dies while the program is undergoing major changes, and his disappearance, linked to the use of LSD, raises as much uncertainty as administrative silence. The 1975 files specify Frank Olson's status as a civilian working for the Army, insist on the mention of an unwanted LSD ingestion, and highlight the dramatic circumstances of his death, without the declassified documents containing definitive proof to conclude a voluntary act or a provoked situation. News of this incident quickly travels up the hierarchy and immediately results in an administrative reaction. On December 1, 1953, an official memo circulates within the organization requesting all LSD stocks to be placed under seal. In other words, an impoundment that puts all material related to this substance out of reach of any improvised use. The officials explain in this document that they want to avoid such an incident from happening again, and,
According to the notes, it seems that the hierarchy considers the administration of LSD to these individuals an excess not approved by the security or medical services. Sex 2.0. The few available excerpts evoke a climate of urgency. They seek to lock down unauthorized experiments, attempt to limit the risks of leaks to the press or potential controversies, and demand that each involved unit precisely justify the use of chemical substances in their interrogation or research programs. However, despite these firm instructions, the historian who looks into these memos today might suspect the existence of more discreet measures that escape the simple ceiling. LSD is already circulating in certain divisions, and the idea of controlling the mind through pharmacological means is not abandoned, even if it is temporarily halted by this resounding event. When one examines the documentation produced after the fall of 1953, the lack of official information is striking. The archives become incomplete, scattered, as if a form of increased discretion surrounds the activities. The reference Senate report, studied much later, notes that there are few tangible elements on the exact fate of Project Artichoke after this date. The version defended by the CIA presents the year 1956 as the official end of the program. From an administrative point of view, the CIA indeed asserts that, as of 1956, everything related to Artichoke is reclassified, suspended, or subjected to other procedures, suggesting a dismantling or a transfer to a new structure. However, the same source mentions that within security teams and medical services, the use of techniques described as special interrogation does not disappear overnight. Some clues suggest that the accumulated expertise does not vanish, and that doctors, security officers, or scientific advisors continue to explore similar methods. One then enters a gray area. Since the declassified documents are fragmented, we see a few acronyms, some operation notes, but nothing that clearly explains the exact nature of the procedures or the extent of the experiments taking place in the shadows.